The morning sun struggled to break through the thick canopy of the Amazon rainforest as Maya Torres wiped sweat from her brow. 6 days into her 2-week expedition, mapping deforestation patterns, and her body was still adjusting to the crushing humidity. Not that she minded much, this was her element. At 34, she had spent nearly a decade as an environmental researcher, but something about this particular forest still took her breath away. Just a few more readings and we can head back to camp, she muttered to herself, adjusting the straps of her heavy backpack. The weight of her equipment, satellite GPS, cameras, soil sampling kits, and enough water to last the day, pulled at her shoulders. Her dark hair was tied back in a practical ponytail, her olive skin tanned from years of field work. The research team had split up that morning, each taking a different quadrant of their study area. Maya had volunteered for the northeastern section, known for its challenging terrain but relatively untouched ecosystem. Her data would help create an updated map of the region, documenting the creeping effects of illegal logging and climate change on one of Earth's most precious resources. She checked her GPS again and frowned. The screen flickered, then went dark. Not now, she groaned, tapping the device against her palm. After a few unsuccessful attempts to revive it, she placed it carefully in her pack. Without the GPS, she'd have to rely on her compass and the natural landmarks she'd noted on her paper map. It wasn't ideal, but she'd faced worse setbacks. Maya consulted her map and the position of the sun. According to her calculations, she needed to head east for another kilometer to complete her assigned area. Then she could loop back toward camp before sunset. Easy enough. 2 hours later, Maya wasn't so sure. The terrain had become increasingly difficult, with dense undergrowth and unexpected ravines forcing her to detour multiple times. Her paper map, while helpful, couldn't account for the way the landscape had changed since it was made 3 years ago. A recent storm had likely altered some of the features she was using as reference points. Keep it together, she told herself, fighting back the first flutters of concern. Find higher ground for a better view. Ahead, the land seemed to rise into a gentle hill, a perfect vantage point. She pushed forward, machete in hand, cutting through vines and brush. The physical effort helped quiet her mind, focusing her thoughts on the immediate task rather than the growing possibility that she'd wandered off course. As she neared the top of the rise, something about the forest changed. The trees here were younger, the undergrowth less dense. Nature was reclaiming something, but what? Perhaps an old clearing from previous logging operations? That would actually be useful data for her research. Maya finally broke through to the highest point and froze in her tracks. She blinked hard, certain that the heat and exhaustion were causing her to hallucinate. There, nestled among the trees about 200 meters away, rose the unmistakable white hull of a massive cruise ship. "What the?" she whispered, her voice lost in the ambient sounds of the forest. Birds called overhead and insects buzzed around her, completely unaffected by the impossible scene before her. The ship, and it was definitely a ship, not some strange rock formation or trick of light, sat at an odd angle, its lower portion partially buried in the earth. Vegetation had begun to claim it, with vines crawling up its sides and young trees growing close to its hull. The vessel's once pristine white paint was peeling and weathered, streaked with rust in places. Yet despite its decrepit state, the ship was unmistakably out of place, a giant monument to human engineering stranded in one of the most remote places on Earth. Maya fumbled for her camera, nearly dropping it in her haste. She snapped several photos, half convinced the ship would disappear if she looked away, but it remained stubbornly real, a puzzle that defied all logic. "This can't be happening," she said aloud, her voice helping to ground her in reality. "There's no water for hundreds of kilometers. No way to get something this size here. And yet, there it was, a cruise ship that would normally carry thousands of passengers, somehow transported to the middle of the Amazon rainforest." Maya checked her satellite phone, desperate to call someone, anyone, who could verify she wasn't losing her mind. No signal, of course. She'd need to climb higher. Curiosity overpowering caution, she began moving toward the vessel. As she drew closer, details emerged that only confirmed its reality. She could make out the name on the hull, Caribbean Princess. Lifeboats still hung from their davits, though many had broken free and lay scattered on the ground. Windows lined the various decks, some broken, others intact but clouded with grime and time. The forest floor around the ship was unusual too. Maya's trained eye noticed signs of massive flooding, soil deposits and debris patterns that suggested an enormous volume of water had once rushed through this area. But when? And with enough force to carry a cruise ship inland? It seemed impossible. She approached the starboard side where the ship's hull met the earth at a steep angle. Decades of research instincts kicked in as she began documenting everything with her camera. Close-up shots of the hull showing the waterline, the pattern of vegetation reclaiming the metal, measurements using her own height for scale. A fallen tree created a natural ramp leading up to what had once been a service door, now hanging open like a gaping wound in the ship's side. Maya hesitated only briefly before climbing up. The scientific part of her brain cataloged potential risks, structural instability, wild animals that might have made the ship their home, sharp metal and broken glass. But her overwhelming curiosity pushed these concerns aside. The door led to a narrow corridor that would have normally been used by crew members. Emergency lights, long dead, lined the ceiling. Maya switched on her powerful flashlight, its beam cutting through years of dust and darkness. "Hello?" she called out, immediately feeling foolish. Nobody had answered that call in years, perhaps decades. The corridor opened into what must have been a mid-level dining room. Tables were still set with plates and silverware, chairs overturned as if diners had left in a hurry. A thick layer of dust covered everything, disturbed only by the tracks of small animals. Maya's mind raced with questions. Where were the passengers and crew? How did the ship get here? When did this happen? The conditions suggested years of abandonment. But surely an event of this magnitude would have made international news. How could something so enormous simply disappear without the whole world knowing? She continued exploring, moving carefully through the silent vessel. The grand staircase, the casino with chips still scattered across felt tables. The swimming pool now a breeding ground for mosquitoes and filled with rainwater and leaves. Each space told the same story of sudden abandonment. In what must have been the ship's main ballroom, Maya found herself standing before floor-to-ceiling windows, now clouded and cracked but still offering a view of the forest beyond. The contrast was jarring. Crystal chandeliers above her head, jungle pressing against the glass. Two worlds that should never have met. Her satellite phone chimed unexpectedly, startling her so badly she nearly dropped it. "A signal, finally!" Weak but present, she quickly dialed her research team's emergency number. "This is Maya Torres," she said as soon as the call connected, her voice echoing in the empty ballroom. "I'm safe, but I've found something. Something impossible. A cruise ship. In the middle of the forest." She paused, listening to the disbelief on the other end of the line. "Yes, a real cruise ship. The Caribbean Princess. I'm standing inside it right now." She promised to send photos as soon as the connection improved and agreed to stay put until a rescue team could locate her using the phone's GPS. As she ended the call, Maya walked back to those enormous windows and stared out at the endless green of the Amazon. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows through the trees. Soon she'd need to find a safe place within the ship to wait for her team. She pressed her hand against the glass, feeling the barrier between the human world of luxury cruises and the ancient, indifferent power of the rainforest. Nature was already working to erase this human intrusion, reclaiming it inch by inch. Given enough time, the forest would win, swallowing the Caribbean Princess completely. But for now, the ship remained, a mystery waiting to be solved, a story waiting to be told. And Maya Torres, who had only meant to map deforestation patterns, found herself at the center of a discovery that would change everything. The real question was, change what exactly, and how? As darkness fell over the forest, the abandoned cruise ship stood like a ghost from another world, its presence a riddle that defied all logical explanation. Maya settled in for a long night, knowing that by tomorrow her discovery would begin sending ripples far beyond this remote corner of the Amazon. Maya woke to the sound of voices calling her name. Sunlight streamed through the cracked windows of the ship's ballroom, where she'd spent an uncomfortable night on a dusty couch. For a moment, she wondered if she'd dreamed the whole thing, the cruise ship, the forest, but the reality around her remained stubbornly in place. "Maya, you in there?" The voice belonged to Carlos, the expedition leader. She rushed to the broken service entrance where she'd entered the day before. 4 members of her research team stood below, their expressions a mix of concern and disbelief as they stared up at the massive vessel. I'm here, Maya called, waving. Told you I wasn't hallucinating? Holy, Carlos whispered, shaking his head. We thought you were confused or dehydrated when you called. But this... He gestured at the ship, words failing him. Within an hour, the entire research team had assembled at the site. 10 environmental scientists, all experts in their fields, and not one of them could explain how a cruise ship had ended up in the Amazon rainforest, hundreds of kilometers from the nearest navigable river large enough to accommodate it. The Caribbean Princess, said Lisa, the team's oceanographer, reading from her tablet, reported missing 8 years ago during Hurricane Raphael. The whole ship, crew and passengers, over 3,000 people in total, vanished during one of the worst storms in recorded history. But that storm hit the Caribbean, said Carlos. That's thousands of kilometers from here. Maya led them through the ship, pointing out what she'd discovered during her initial exploration. The dust-covered dining rooms, the grand staircase, the ballroom with its incongruous view of jungle instead of ocean. Everything suggested the ship had been abandoned in a hurry. Personal belongings left in cabins, half-eaten meals fossilized by time on dining tables. Look at this, called Rodrigo, the team's meteorologist. He'd been examining the ship's bridge. The last log entry. He pointed to an old-fashioned logbook, its pages yellow with age. It mentions unprecedented wave activity and loss of all navigational systems. The final entry just says, "May God help us all." A heavy silence fell over the group. What happened to the people? Asked Maya, voicing the question on everyone's mind. They split into teams, documenting everything. Maya focused on the exterior, mapping how the ship sat in relation to the surrounding forest. She noticed patterns in the soil and vegetation that suggested a massive flood had occurred years ago, carrying debris and apparently an entire cruise ship deep into the forest before receding. By midday, the story had spread beyond their small group. Their research institute had alerted authorities, who in turn contacted international maritime agencies. Maya's satellite phone wouldn't stop ringing with calls from supervisors, government officials, and eventually reporters. Ms. Torres, can you confirm that you found the Caribbean Princess missing since 2017? Asked one journalist. How many bodies were recovered from the site? Asked another more ghoulishly. That's just it, Maya replied, trying to keep her voice steady despite her exhaustion. We haven't found any. No bodies, no remains. It's as if everyone simply left. By evening, the first helicopter arrived, a Brazilian government team with officials from the Maritime Authority. They circled the ship, cameras documenting the impossible scene from above. Maya watched from the ground, still struggling to process everything that had happened in the 24 hours since she'd first spotted the white hull among the trees. A second helicopter arrived at dusk, this one carrying a small team of international salvage experts and maritime investigators. Among them was Harry Chen, a naval architect who had actually worked on designing the Caribbean Princess 15 years earlier. It's not possible, he kept saying as he walked around the massive hull. Even with a storm surge, the geography doesn't make sense. Yet here it is, said Maya. As night fell again, the research camp had tripled in size. Tents dotted the small clearing near the ship. Generators hummed and powerful lights illuminated the Caribbean Princess against the darkness of the forest. The story had gone viral worldwide, with news helicopters now kept at bay by a hastily established no-fly zone. Maya couldn't sleep. She sat by the campfire, listening to the excited chatter of her colleagues and the new arrivals as they debated theories, storm surge, rogue waves, secret military experiments, even aliens. You should talk to the Kanamari people, said a quiet voice behind her. Maya turned to find an older woman she didn't recognize. She wore the uniform of the Brazilian Environmental Protection Agency, but had the distinct features of the indigenous peoples of the region. I'm Ana Luz, the woman said, sitting beside Maya. I grew up 50 kilometers from here. My grandmother was Kanamari, the local tribe. Asked Maya. Anna nodded. They have stories about this place. Old stories that no one believed. Until now. The next morning, Maya convinced Carlos to let her and Anna travel to the nearest Kanamari village. They took one of the smaller research trucks, bumping along crude logging roads for 3 hours before switching to a boat for the final stretch. The village sat on stilts along the bank of a narrow river. Children played in the muddy shallows while adults worked on fishing nets and food preparation. An elderly man watched their approach from the central meeting house. "That's Elder Paulo," Anna whispered. "He's the keeper of stories." Elder Paulo greeted them with cautious courtesy. When Anna explained the purpose of their visit in the local dialect, his eyes widened. "You found the ghost ship," he said in accented Portuguese. "The one that came with the great water." Maya felt a chill despite the oppressive humidity. "You know about the ship?" Elder Paulo nodded solemnly. 8 summers ago, the rains came like never before. For weeks, water fell from the sky. The rivers rose until they became one great sea. His weathered hands gestured broadly. Then one night there was a sound like thunder that did not end. The next day, when some young men went hunting, they found the great white boat sitting in the forest. "Did you see any people?" Maya asked. "Passengers, crew?" The elder was silent for a long moment. "We saw lights moving inside for 3 days. We kept our distance, our legends worn against the boats of the dead. On the 4th day, a helicopter came. Many helicopters. Men in uniform took people away. They warned our people never to speak of it." "Military?" asked Maya. "Which country?" Elder Paulo shrugged. "They spoke many languages. They took the living people and left the boat to be reclaimed by the forest. They said the world was not ready to know." Maya and Anna exchanged glances. "Why didn't anyone report this?" Maya asked. "Who would believe us?" The elder smiled sadly. "When we tried to tell officials in the city, they laughed, said we were superstitious. Over time, even our own young people began to think it was just a story." As they traveled back to the research camp, Maya's mind raced. If Elder Paulo was telling the truth, it meant most of the passengers and crew had survived, at least initially. It also meant some organization powerful enough to mount a massive rescue operation in the remote Amazon, had deliberately kept the ship's location a secret. But why? The camp had grown again during their absence. Several large military tents had been erected, and uniformed personnel from the Brazilian Navy now patrolled the perimeter. A makeshift press area had been established half a kilometer away, with dozens of reporters from around the world broadcasting the incredible story. Carlos pulled Maya aside as soon as she arrived. "Where have you been?" "Things are getting complicated. The maritime authorities are taking over the investigation. Some suits from insurance companies have shown up too. They're talking about salvage rights." "Carlos, I think—" She was interrupted by the arrival of a black SUV. A tall man in an expensive suit stepped out, flanked by what could only be security personnel. He scanned the crowd until his eyes landed on Maya. "Ms. Torres," he called, walking toward her with purpose. "I'm Richard Wilson, representing White Star Cruise Lines, the owners of the Caribbean Princess." Maya straightened her shoulders. Something in the man's demeanor put her on guard. "We're very interested in your discovery," Wilson continued, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. "And we'd like to discuss the terms under which you'll maintain complete confidentiality about certain aspects of this situation." Maya felt Carlos stiffen beside her. "Confidentiality?" she repeated. "The ship is sitting in the middle of the Amazon. It's a little late for secrets, don't you think?" Wilson's smile disappeared. "Ms. Torres, there are aspects to this situation that go far beyond a simple maritime accident. National security is involved. Corporate interests. Insurance implications worth billions." "What about the passengers?" Maya asked. "The 3,000 people who were on board." Wilson glanced around at the growing crowd of listeners. "Perhaps we could speak somewhere more private." Before Maya could respond, a commotion erupted at the edge of camp. A group of people, ordinary-looking men and women of various ages, pushed past the security perimeter. They carried photos and handmade signs. "That's my mother," a woman cried, holding up a photo of an elderly lady. "Passenger cabin 24/17. Where is she?" Chaos erupted in the camp. The families of missing passengers surged forward, their years of grief and uncertainty boiling over into desperate questions. Security personnel tried to maintain order while Richard Wilson, the cruise line representative, retreated toward his SUV, speaking urgently into his phone. Maya found herself caught in the middle. A middle-aged woman grabbed her arm, eyes wild with hope and desperation. "You found the ship," she said, her voice breaking. "My daughter was on board. She was only 19. Please, have you seen any sign of survivors?" Before Maya could answer, Carlos pulled her away, guiding her toward their research tent. "This is getting out of hand," he said, concern etched on his face. The military is talking about declaring this a restricted zone. They're bringing in more personnel tonight. We can't let them shut this down, Maya insisted. These families deserve answers. And what about what the elder told you? About people being evacuated? Maya lowered her voice. If it's true, it means someone orchestrated a massive cover-up. But why keep it secret that people survived? Their conversation was interrupted by Dr. Lena Vasquez, a maritime historian who had arrived that morning. The petite woman had been examining the ship's logbooks and navigation systems all day. You need to see this, she said, holding up her tablet. I've been analyzing the ship's final navigation data. The Caribbean Princess wasn't just caught in a hurricane, it encountered something meteorologists are calling a mega-cyclone, an entirely new class of storm that formed when two major hurricane systems merged. She showed them a weather map from 8 years ago. The storm created a storm surge estimated at over 30 meters high, a wall of water unlike anything recorded in modern history. It literally picked up the ship and carried it inland. But that doesn't explain how it got this far into the Amazon, Carlos objected. No, agreed Lena. The distance is impossible based on known weather patterns. She hesitated. Unless the storm wasn't entirely natural. What are you suggesting? Maya asked. Lena glanced around before continuing in a whisper. There are rumors that several countries were conducting weather modification experiments in the Caribbean that year. Military applications. Something went wrong. The implications hung in the air. If true, it would explain the secrecy, the cover-up, the pressure now being exerted from multiple governments. Night fell over the camp. The families had been moved to a hastily arranged shelter in a clearing nearby. Maya couldn't sleep, their faces haunting her thoughts. Around midnight, she slipped out of her tent and made her way back to the ship. The massive vessel looked ghostly in the moonlight, its white hull glowing against the darkness of the surrounding forest. Military guards patrolled the perimeter but seemed focused on keeping people out, rather than monitoring those already inside the restricted area. Maya used her researcher credentials to get past them and entered the ship through the same service door she'd first used. This time she had a different purpose. If survivors had been evacuated, as Elder Paulo claimed, there might be evidence, something overlooked in the initial excitement of the discovery. She made her way to the bridge, the heart of the ship's operations. The large windows that once offered views of endless ocean now framed the surreal sight of jungle canopy. Maya ran her flashlight over the instrument panels, most dead and silent for years. Something caught her eye. A small digital recorder, the kind used for personal memos, wedged beneath the captain's chair. She picked it up, surprised to find it still had power when she pressed the play button. A man's voice, tense but controlled, filled the quiet bridge. This is Captain Thomas Hayes, Caribbean Princess. Final log entry. It's been 3 days since the wave carried us inland. Most communications equipment destroyed. Emergency power failing. We've organized passengers on the upper decks. Many injured, but amazingly few casualties considering what we endured. Maya listened, transfixed, as the captain continued. We spotted helicopters this morning. Not search and rescue, military unmarked. They landed in the clearing west of our position. Personnel approaching now. They're ordering evacuation, but insisting on complete communication blackout. No phones, no personal effects. Something's not right. They're saying it's a matter of national security. I'm hiding this record in hopes the recording cut off abruptly. Maya's hands trembled as she pocketed the recorder. This was proof not just of survival but of a deliberate cover-up. She needed to get this to someone who could help, a journalist perhaps, or a lawyer representing the families. As she turned to leave, a beam of light caught her face. Find something interesting? Richard Wilson stood in the doorway, flanked by 2 security men. Maya backed away. The passengers survived. They were evacuated. You've been lying to their families for 8 years. Wilson sighed. It's more complicated than that, Ms. Torres. The circumstances of the Caribbean Princess incident involved sensitive international matters. You mean illegal weather experiments? A storm that got out of control? A flicker of surprise crossed Wilson's face. You've been busy, but you're only seeing pieces of a much larger puzzle. Then explain it to me, Maya challenged. Explain why 3,000 people were forced to disappear from their own lives. Wilson studied her for a moment. Walk with me. He nodded to his security men who stepped aside. Against her better judgment, Maya followed him to the ship's promenade deck. Through broken windows, they could see the lights of the camp in the distance. "What I'm about to tell you goes beyond cruise lines and insurance claims," Wilson said quietly. "Yes, there was a military weather experiment. Yes, it created a storm beyond anything anticipated, but what that storm uncovered was something else entirely." Uncovered? The wave that carried this ship inland didn't just deposit it randomly in the forest. It exposed something buried deep in this region, something several governments have been searching for since World War II. Maya stared at him incredulously. "What are you talking about?" "The Kanamari people call it the place where the sky touched Earth. During the war, both Allied and Axis powers received intelligence about unusual phenomena in this region, technology not of this world." Maya almost laughed. "You expect me to believe this is about aliens? I expect you to understand why certain discoveries must be managed carefully," Wilson replied coldly. The passengers and crew were evacuated safely. They were given new identities, new lives, generous compensation. You can't just make people disappear. In a world where panic over certain revelations could destabilize global security. Yes, Ms. Torres, sometimes difficult decisions must be made. A commotion from outside interrupted them, shouting, the sound of vehicles. Through the windows, Maya saw more trucks arriving, military personnel pouring out. "They're here to secure the site permanently," Wilson explained. "By morning, a cover story will be released. Structural instability making the ship too dangerous to approach. Within a week, it will be dismantled and removed. The mystery will fade to an interesting footnote in maritime history. The families deserve the truth," Maya insisted. "Which truth? That their loved ones chose new lives over returning to them? That's the reality, Ms. Torres. When offered the choice between returning to their old lives with a story no one would believe or accepting new identities with substantial financial support, most chose the latter." Maya felt sick. If Wilson was telling the truth and she wasn't sure he was, it presented a moral complexity she hadn't anticipated. "And what about me? My team? The people who've seen the ship?" Wilson's smile didn't reach his eyes. "You're a respected environmental researcher who discovered an interesting anomaly. You'll be remembered for that. But push beyond the official narrative and your credibility will be questioned. Your career, your future, all can be affected." It was a threat thinly veiled. Before Maya could respond, Ana Luz appeared at the far end of the promenade, breathing hard as if she'd been running. "Maya, the families, they're breaking through the perimeter. They're coming to the ship." In the distance, Maya could see flashlights bobbing through the trees, dozens of them, moving toward the ship. The confrontation she'd hoped to avoid was about to happen. And somehow she would have to decide where she stood, with the official story or with the truth as she understood it. Whatever that truth might be. Maya's heart pounded as she watched the procession of lights moving through the trees toward the ship. Wilson barked orders into his radio demanding more security personnel to intercept the families. "You can't stop them," Maya said. "They've waited 8 years for answers." Wilson's face hardened. "This is bigger than their personal closure, Ms. Torres. Is it?" Maya challenged. "Or is it just more convenient for everyone involved to bury this story along with the ship?" Ana grabbed Maya's arm. "We need to go now." Something in Ana's urgency cut through Maya's hesitation. They slipped away while Wilson was distracted by the approaching crisis, making their way through the ship's labyrinthine corridors toward the exit. "Why are you helping me?" Maya asked as they ducked into a service hallway to avoid a patrol of security guards. "Because the Kanamari stories about this place go much deeper than what I told you," Ana replied in a hushed voice. "My grandmother was the tribe's knowledge keeper before Elder Paulo. She told me things that were not shared with outsiders." They reached the service door and peered out. The area below was in chaos. Families pushing against a line of military personnel, cameras flashing as journalists who had sneaked past the perimeter captured the confrontation. In the confusion, Maya and Ana slipped down and melted into the crowd. Carlos found them minutes later, his face etched with worry. "Where have you been?" "They're about to declare martial law here." Maya pulled the recorder from her pocket. "I found proof. The passengers survived. They were evacuated by military forces and essentially disappeared." Carlos stared at the small device. That changes everything." "Or nothing," Maya said bitterly. "Wilson already threatened me. If we go public, they'll discredit us." Ana touched Maya's shoulder. There's someone you need to meet. But we have to go now, while everyone's distracted. They slipped away from the camp, using Anna's knowledge of the forest to avoid the security patrols. An hour's hike brought them to a small clearing where a weathered jeep waited. Get in, Anna instructed. It's a 2-hour drive. Dawn was breaking as they reached their destination, a small compound of buildings nestled in a valley surrounded by forest. It looked like a research station, but no flags or insignia identified it. An older man greeted them at the gate. He wore simple clothes but carried himself with military bearing. His weathered face suggested years spent outdoors, and his eyes, sharp and assessing, missed nothing. "Dr. Reyes?" Anna said respectfully. "Thank you for agreeing to meet us." The man nodded. "Anna tells me you found the ship, and that you have questions." Inside his sparse office, Dr. Reyes listened as Maya explained everything: finding the ship, the captain's recording, Wilson's threats, the desperate families. When she finished, Reyes was silent for a long moment. 8 years ago, I was the lead scientist for an international climate research initiative. We were studying ways to mitigate hurricane intensity, not enhance it as the conspiracy theories suggest. He walked to a filing cabinet, unlocked it, and removed a thick folder. What happened was an anomaly no one could have predicted. 2 Category 5 hurricanes merged, creating a hyper-hurricane that generated a storm surge over 40 meters high. The Caribbean Princess was caught in it. But how did it end up hundreds of kilometers inland? Carlos asked. Reyes spread a map on his desk. The storm surge created what we now call a mega tsunami that traveled up the Amazon basin. The ship was carried on that wave until the water finally receded. It's unprecedented but not impossible. And the passengers? Maya pressed. The captain's recording mentioned military evacuation. Reyes sighed. Yes, but not for the reasons Wilson implied. There was no alien technology, no government conspiracy, at least not initially. It was a humanitarian rescue mission. Then why the secrecy? Carlos demanded. Because of what happened after. Reyes's voice grew quieter. The storm had exposed something in that region. Not alien technology, but something almost as disturbing. An ecological anomaly. A pocket of the forest where evolutionary patterns had taken a different turn. He pulled out photographs showing strange plants and insects unlike anything Maya had seen in her years of research. The area where the ship landed is what we now call a biological island, a place isolated for thousands of years where species evolved along different pathways. Like the Galapagos, but hidden in the Amazon? Maya asked. Reyes nodded. The initial secrecy was about protecting this discovery until we understood it. But then corporate interests got involved. Pharmaceutical companies realized the potential for new medicines, new compounds, billions in potential profits. And the passengers became an inconvenience, Maya concluded bitterly. Most were offered generous settlements and new identities. Some took the money and disappeared willingly. Others, he hesitated. Others who threatened to go public experienced more forceful persuasion. Maya felt sick. So Wilson was partly telling the truth. Wilson represents interests that would strip mine that biological treasure trove if given the chance. Reyes tapped the folder. But there's more. Some of the passengers and crew didn't leave. They chose to stay. Maya and Carlos exchanged bewildered looks. Stay in the forest? With the Kanamari people. About 30 passengers and crew. They've been living with the tribe for 8 years. Including the ship's captain, Anna spoke up. My cousin is married to one of them now. They have 2 children. Maya's mind reeled with the implications. But why would the captain stay? His recording suggested he was suspicious of the military evacuation. Because he discovered something in those first days that changed him, Reyes said. Something about the biological anomalies in that region. Some of the plants have unusual properties. Medicinal? Asked Carlos. Reyes looked uncomfortable. Among other things, the captain had terminal cancer when the ship sailed. Stage 4 pancreatic, after 3 weeks in that region, consuming local plants under Kanamari guidance. His cancer was gone. The office fell silent as they absorbed this information. So the real secret, Maya said slowly, isn't the ship or how it got there, it's what's in that part of the forest. Reyes nodded grimly. And now you understand why so many powerful interests want to control access to that area. The pharmaceutical potential alone is worth trillions. Add in the military applications of plants that can accelerate healing or enhance physical capabilities. We need to tell the families, Maya insisted. At least let them know their loved ones survived. Some of those families might prefer the insurance payouts to knowing their relatives chose a new life in the forest, Reyes pointed out. And exposing this publicly would bring a flood of exploitation to a fragile ecosystem and an indigenous people who've managed to stay relatively untouched by outside forces. The ethical complexity was overwhelming. Maya stood and walked to the window, looking out at the rainforest stretching to the horizon. There's something else, Anna said quietly. The reason I brought you here. She nodded to Reyes, who pressed a button on his desk phone. Send him in. The door opened and a man entered. He was tall, his skin tanned by years in the sun, his once corporate haircut grown out and tied back. But Maya recognized him immediately from the photos the families had been carrying. Captain Hayes, she whispered. The captain of the Caribbean Princess nodded. Dr. Torres, I've been following your work since you found our ship. The families are there now, Maya told him. They deserve to know. That's why I'm here, Hayes said. Some of us have decided it's time to come forward on our own terms. Not through Wilson's people or the military, but in a way that protects the Kanamari and the forest. But the pharmaceutical companies, the military, they'll never allow it, Carlos objected. Hayes smiled faintly. They don't know what we know about the forest, or that we've spent 8 years learning from the Kanamari how to use its gifts. He held Maya's gaze. We need someone the public will trust. A respected environmental researcher who discovered a ghost ship and is about to discover something even more remarkable. Maya felt the weight of the decision before her. She could walk away, protect her career, let the official story stand, or she could help these people tell their truth, and in doing so perhaps protect something precious from those who would exploit it. Behind them, Rhea's phone rang. He answered, listened, then looked up with alarm. Wilson's people have convinced the military to declare the ship site a national security zone. They're moving in heavy equipment. They're going to destroy the ship and everything around it. Today.